as I was describing on the bus, this is compost from a large dairy, a 20,000 cow dairy at Veblen, South Dakota, which is just 15 miles away. So I have access to basically all the manure that I can handle or want. But I do, these windrows were this high with weeds just a couple days ago when we started composting them. And now we're composting them in along with the manure. And the manure comes fairly wet to me. So, and it actually is beneficial because I don't need to add water to this compost. Basically, as I compost it and as it composts, it loses water, but stays moist enough generally so that it will reach a composting temperatures. So I put in some thermometers here, but the internal in the middle is about 100 degrees. That's just at the beginning where I'd like to see it. The edges where there's more oxygen is at 140, okay? So that's getting almost too warm. So I want them at about ideal temperatures, about 130 degrees. I try to do about 5 turns over the course of about 4 or 5 weeks. And this is our 3rd turn, so most of the turns happen in the first 2 weeks, and then they'll start to cool down, and you don't want to compost them too often. You'll dry them out. So once you get to a stable temperature, so if I can get the temperature to hang about a 120, 130, then I don't compost them until I want to do my final turn or so in it. So 5, maybe 6 turns over about 2 months. And then, so it reduces the bulk from, let's say 100% what they hauled me, down to the bulk is down to about 40% of what it originally was. So I just have a lot less spreader loads to spread. And it condenses the nutrient part of it. That doesn't really go anyplace. You're gonna lose the ammonia whether you spread it or compost it. You know, some of that ammonia you're gonna lose anyway. This is a fairly low density manure product. I kind of like, it's kind of like inoculated straw, honestly, from its nutrient density standpoint. It really doesn't have, per ton on a dry matter basis, it doesn't have any more nutrient content in it than straw does. But it composts well because it's inoculated and it has moisture. So all I got to do is run through it with that machine. That machine was made in Ontario, Canada, north of London, about an hour. And it's called a sittler. I think it should be called a shitler, but it's called a sittler. It does a beautiful job. It runs very smooth, very quiet, till it hits a rock or something. But straw has a value from a livestock producer, right, as bedding. That's, you know, how it turns into manure is those forages go through an animal, turn them into manure. This is just keeping the poop in the loop, right? I'm just fortunate enough to have a dairy close by, so I can help out my cousins and neighbors with straw. And actually, so like our straw crop on our rye this year would have been probably 4,000 or 5,000 pounds. And that's a little too much for crop production the following year. We see a slight reduction just because it's just too much mulch on the soil surface. So what I like to do is when I harvest this, I spread all the straw out and then let the cowboys rake it back in. So they just get the coarse straw. All the fines and all the chaff is down on the soil surface. And then I try to harvest it as tall as I can to leave stuff stand. Plus then the cover crop that's planted in here, assuming it comes up, has flax, oats, turnip radish, and then the volunteer rye will come. And then I haven't planted the faba beans yet, but my bio strip till faba beans will be planted with my corn planter. We'll be starting that probably tomorrow. It's got biology in it. Now we're cooking some of it, so the biology is mostly bacterial. If I leave this sit long enough, you'll see the fungal hyphae grow through it. But then you run it through a spreader and tear it all apart and lay it on the top. So I honestly am not the soil biologist that Gabe or Abby are, so I probably, can't really answer to you. But just from talking to people and from what I've seen, manure is not a bad thing as long as it fits your program. We have a good spreader. We went through the years of having bad spreaders, and when you're spreading fertilizer, you want it spread evenly. So I do have a Artex now, vertical beater spreader, that does a nice job of even spreading. And we'll start spreading later in the fall on the cover crops. So I apply compost once every 4 years. And I always do it on this rotation, the cereal grain cover crop rotation, and then follow corn the following year, beans the following year after that, specialty crops the year after that, and then back to cereal grains. So I'm moving the compost around the farm on a 4-year rotation. I'm adding active carbon to my system in the form of compost, and that active carbon becomes actually something that biology has to consume nitrogen from someplace else to eat that active carbon, to get that stabilized in the soil. So I actually don't get an N credit. In fact, I probably actually get an N decrease from the first year or so after applying the compost. And that might be one of the reasons why I'm still needing 80 pounds of N on my corn, is applying this compost. Now, the following years, then, like soybeans, I don't apply anything. And the soybeans have really responded well the following year. Yields have been really very good. Planting green, and then plus you've got that nutrition for your cover crops to flourish on also. So the cover crops look great behind it. Honestly, when I started down this venture, I knew from my own history, okay, bring the cows in, feed some cows, you got some manure pack, you spread it on the back 40 or whatever, and the back 40 really does great, right? So I think most farmers realize that there's some value, nutrient, and organic component to manures that are good, whether they dropped out of a cow or whether they dropped out of a cow and you moved it out there. But I wasn't sure either. There might be some things in here. I think these are quite high in sodium salts. And one thing I do see is wherever I compost these rows, I don't have very much crop production for a couple of years. Takes a couple. We'll see that at the next stop. The crop production it's too hot for multiple reasons. Maybe it's N, maybe it's salts. I actually should soil test just some rows and see what it is that's interfering with crop production. But so, that's an issue. If you lose, I not only lost crop production this year, but I will the next year or two after this, where these rows sit. When we transport this to another field, I'll actually hire the dairy that has all the equipment. They'll come with live bottom trucks, same trucks that haul this here. And once it's composted, then they'll haul them to the fields that I spread it on. So we just load it with either a front, in their case, they use a payloader. In my case, I use a tractor loader. So I get an analysis from the dairy, and then I usually test it after it's composted. The one nice thing about it is pretty consistent. I mean, the dairy ration doesn't change a lot. So pretty much it hasn't changed from when I started, and the results are about the same. So when I get done composting it, it's about 0.8% phosphorus on a dry matter basis. And it's about 1.5 potassium, and then sulfur at about 0.3, and on down the line. And there's like about 34 pounds of nitrogen per ton, but it's in a pretty stable organic form. So it has to be worked on by microbes over time. So the question was why I went to biostrip till. I started strip tilling I'd have a stubble field like this, a cereal stubble field, and I'd come in and I'd do nutrient placement on 30-inch centers. Just everybody has seen a strip till field, right? You know, I did that for close to 20 years. I started that in the late 80s. And then through the 90s, again, even though I was doing some strip tillage, I still wasn't managing the moisture. I was managing the temperature a little bit, but a lot of times these fields were too wet in the springtime. So when I started planting cover crops, the need to strip till went down. And then we discovered about 20 years ago that if we put certain plants in a row, right where the corn's gonna go, it benefits the corn even more. So then we called it bio-strip till, and that's what we're doing. So I plant the faba beans with the same planter I plant the corn, and that's where I follow those faba bean rows. So I'll go in with the planter here. Maybe even tomorrow, he's gonna hook back up to the planter when he gets done composting this. And we'll take the faba beans we bought from my buddy in Manitoba, and we'll put them in here and plant them in pair row 60s, right on top of the other cover crop that's in here, planted. And then hopefully that'll grow. Last fall, it got about this high. And then the cattle grazed it, and they did well on it. And then we planted corn in it this spring.